Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we interview Walker Diebel. Now, Ken, I have to say, Walker is one of our dream guests. And the reason for that is every so often you read a book that takes everything that you think and flips it on its head. And Walker's book, Buy Then Build, when we read that last year, did exactly that. It made me rethink my whole business and my whole strategy for growing and scaling. And he had an awesome interview, and I'm really excited for our audience to listen in. What did you think?
Yeah, it was a phenomenal interview. We were waiting a while to get Walker on the podcast. You know, he's a local friend here in St. Louis, and it finally happened. And he shared a ton of knowledge. I read his book and Buy Then Build. I definitely recommend it to everyone. You know, he covered the $10 trillion tsunami. If you don't know what that is, he covers that, and he covers some statistics on, startups failing and how it's almost a no-brainer to buy a company for cash flow versus building. And he covers it in depth in the episode. And yeah, it was a really good episode, and I can't wait to share it with the audience.
For sure. And one last teaser I'm going to leave you with is, if you have ever thought about buying a business and thought to yourself, I don't have the money it takes to buy a business, you may rethink that after listening to this episode. Welcome to the show, Walker.
David, Ken, thanks so much for having me. Love being here. Super excited.
Absolutely. Thank you. So first things first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, I just want to say that, during my 20s, I pretty much spent the entire decade trying to figure out how to fire the man, right? And what that did was, it sort of like, taught me that, I was really interested in business, but I was also really interested in the arts and sort of like where they sort of interact, right? And I found that, I really enjoyed the concept of trying to start companies. And so I've tried multiple times with varying degrees of success, but never having even frankly, like a double, I would say, on a company that I've started. I think that might change with the recent creation of the acquisition lab, but we'll see. So, I sort of learned over time that maybe I'm just a really bad entrepreneur, right? But then I started looking into the data, and we all know that 90% of startups basically fail, and that 10 of them sort of make it, right? And it was sort of after I acquired my first business that I really started to understand that 96% of companies in the United States never exceed $1 million in revenue. So once I started being able to kind of lower the bar of what I thought success looked like, I started to get really comfortable with the thought that, acquiring some of the largest companies in the world was actually very, very achievable. And so between I'm 44 now or so. So over the last 14 years, I've done various things, including acquiring over half a dozen companies, working as a business broker, M&A advisor in the online business space, and doing some of the other things that you mentioned, such as some film production, things like that.
Nice, very nice. In the book that you reference, for those tuning in on video, will see me doing the exploding head emoji, if you will. I loved that book. I really liked that book. And the thing that really stood out to me was applying those hard facts about startups versus just acquiring a company that is already up and going and profitable. And so and this is something that you don't hear a lot about, especially in the e-commerce space. It is always start your own private label brand and grow and scale. And that's honestly, that's what I've been doing. That's what Ken has been doing. And reading your book gave me a total shift in the way that I thought about business. So what led you to writing that book?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks so much. I got to tell you that writing it took me about 4.5 years, and I wrote it primarily in the middle of the night. And so anytime someone says, I loved your book, it's a true shot in the arm, and I really appreciate it, because I spent a lot of time wondering if I was just crazy, and I was like publishing sort of all of my faulty logic, right? and the concept being that when you release something that a book like this that no one's really written, it's kind of like, how come no one's written this? How come no one sees this like I do, right? And it ended up being quite the opposite. And it's just been so well received, which has been an incredible experience. But so thank you. But I also, the thing was that, I used my MBA as a career shield to try to start a company while I was while my resume was protected by the fact that I was getting an MBA, right? So I spent a lot of time, and I went through, sort of the Olin Cup process at Washington University in St. Louis. And, we almost had a deal with Walmart, and we had licensed this technology. We were trying to raise capital, and it was a roadshow. We were doing it, right? We're finalists in the business plan competition. And, I saw people that I thought had a much better startup than we did, just sort of collapse, as we were continuing down the track. They were just sort of falling off left and right. And the ones that were sort of, that ended up sort of beating us, I was like, yeah, but those aren't going to make it. And they didn't, right? And ours fell completely apart, okay? And I've learned over time, in other words, I've spent a lot of time in the entrepreneurial community, and I have an MBA with a concentration in entrepreneurship. And I am as big of a geeky fan as any entrepreneur in terms of getting the latest, copy of Inc. magazine and reading about what's the newest technology and how do I start and how do I do this and how do I, start a private label company and all the rest of it. And ultimately, I knew there was a way to try to I knew there was a way to buy an existing company, and I just didn't know how to do it. And so in 2004, I set out to try to do it, and there was no good resources, at all. And I went back and I started talking with some of my MBA professors who tried to talk me out of it. They were explaining to me that it was a really bad idea to go small. And that's when I really understood that the MBA was really for middle management at large organizations. And entrepreneurship was a very recent thing in these programs, right? And so living in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, I later knew that there was this whole business model that was just being completely ignored and undervalued. And you look at, say the names, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, just all of the big entrepreneurs that grace the covers of these magazines that we all sort of worship, right? These are not the 1%. These are the 0.0001%, right? I mean, it is it's one of these where starting a business from scratch is punishment for not understanding statistics. And yet we do it over and over and over. And I'm guilty of it, right? And so I eventually figured out how to sort of navigate these private, opaque, fragmented marketplace and sort of buy my first company. But it took me 4 years, okay, from setting out to learn how to do it to actually acquiring one. So I owned that company and ran it for about 7 years and tried to grow through acquisition and ultimately sold to an acquisition target. And then I did what we all do. I went out and I had my first exit and I'm like, I am successful. Now I can do it. And we did a startup, raised capital, oversubscribed, recruited a executive from Microsoft to be our CEO. We're running beta programs at half a dozen major Fortune 500 companies. You would know the names. And we had the CTO of a major Fortune 500 company working with our dev team, and we were totally doing it this time, and we totally didn't. and so I then went out and was like, okay, I need to go back to where I have success, which is focusing on these base hits, right? And for me, it was kind of we've all seen that movie or read the book Moneyball, right, by Michael Lewis. It's all about how the Boston Red Sox they couldn't compete on getting home runs, so they just focused on getting on base. When I think about acquisition entrepreneurship, I actually call it entremetrics, right, after sabermetrics in that book. It's basically getting on base. How do I get revenue? How do I get customers? How do I get product and infrastructure and all the rest of it first? And then once I've got all of that locked in, now we can get started, right? And so I started writing the book knowing that people around me were buying companies, and I knew it was happening coast to coast. And so I started interviewing other people and wanting to make it about the movement. I didn't want to be the guy. And what I learned over time was that if you really wanted to do that well, to write a Jim Collins caliber book, you need 24 Stanford PhDs on staff. It was just slow going. And every single person I talked to had a very anecdotal experience, right? It was oh, I just was looking for what everyone else is looking for. I was looking for and then they would say something completely different, right? And then it was like, oh, I knew a guy who then introduced me to this lady who sold me this thing. Like it was just everything was so messed up and all over the place, and there was no best practices that I could find, and it was just a great opportunity to kind of try to synthesize all of the information. And so during the time I wrote it, I was also acquiring multiple companies. And so all of a sudden, one day I looked in the mirror and I was like, look, just own it. Like I can be the guy. I'm on the list of people that can write this book. And so I did. David, one more thing. At the risk of talking too long, I want to say one more thing, because there really was another big component that was really instrumental, which was okay, I don't talk about this a whole lot because I feel like people can kind of take the soundbite and then like belittle my entire career. Okay. And the point is this: the first company I bought ended up being my father's printing company. Okay. And the reason for that was twofold. First of all, I was looking, and so all of a sudden, when an opportunity came, he wasn't giving me anything. First of all, it was the same terms as any other deal. Number two, when the deal showed up, I realized that it was something that, number one, I completely trusted the seller. Like for my first time at bat, like I just didn't even have to worry about like, what am I missing or like any of these things. And number two, it was a significantly larger acquisition than I felt like I was going to be able to do without support of a team, right? And so the first company I bought was like 8 million in revenue, okay? And the thing is we sat down really on the same side of the table for obvious reasons, came up with a 27-step plan of how to transfer the company, worked with our CPA, worked with our attorney, and all the rest of it, and got it done. And then the second it was done, two things occurred to me. And this was 7 or 8. Number one, all of these small business owners started coming out of the woodwork being like, how did you do that? Like, how do we do that? And all of a sudden I realized no one understood how to transfer a business, even if they were in the business, right? Whether they were wanting to buy or sell, or they were, Number two, I realized something very, very interesting, which was what just happened was that all the startups that I had completely failed. And yet here I was buying $8 million in revenue by taking a big ass bank loan and writing the seller, right, in this case, a big check, and then he stopped coming to work the very next day. That's what happened, okay? And so I had a personal guarantee, I had a big bank loan, I had collateral with all the assets in the business, and then the cash flow of the business was coming in and paying down the loan. And I was like, okay, this is like a leveraged buyout. Like this is what private equity does, but like I just did it like as an individual. And my realization was everyone at the Olin Cup at Washington University running around trying to generate like their first dollar in revenue, like they're completely missing this. They're completely missing the fact that like you can just run out and acquire $1 million or $8 million in revenue, right? And so the thing is that the reason why I think that is because I had the profile of the people that get that done, which is, oldest kid, white male, dad owns a company, and is looking to transfer it, actually has enough trust in his kid to actually want to try to get it done. And believe me, he told me my whole life there was no way that he was ever going to sell me the company because I was useless, right? So eventually I was good enough, I guess. But the point is I felt like I was privileged enough to try to navigate this path on my own for 3 or 4 years leading up to this day. And then I was privileged enough to actually be someone who had the profile to get it done. And once I got it done, and once I looked at the entrepreneurial ecosystem and how we're all trying to start these companies, I realized there is like this knowledge gap that needs to close. And it was at that time, back in 2008, that like I got the idea to write the book. And it didn't come out for 10 years later.
Well, very nice. I'm glad that you published that book. It certainly changed the way I think about business. And like I said, no one's talking about this. And when you apply hard facts to it, and you have a lot of people involved in business that have a background in accounting or finance, numbers speak a lot louder than anecdotal stories. And so it's surprising that there are not more people talking about it, but I'm glad that you are. So thank you for writing that book.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, so Walker, I last year I got the book and I read it, and here I am. I was 2.5 years into my entrepreneurship journey, building a business, and I'm reading buy then build, and I'm like, what did I do wrong, or maybe I found this book at the right time. So, as I read the book and a couple of the chapters, dive really deep into it, and there's a few statistics that stood out to me. Can you kind of dive into why you don't recommend starting a business?
Sure. Well, I mean, we've covered some of it, right? Like they fail, right? But I think a lot of times I think about all of the different like sort of objections that people might have when they're listening, right? And the one that always struck me was, oh boy, I'm going after venture capital. I'll beat the odds, right? The thing is that you don't have to be in the startup world very long to figure out that it's a very few that actually end up getting venture capital money. Okay, so first of all, you've got to get through that hurdle, and let's demyth a couple of components. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm a great person and I have this wonderful idea. I'm going to go pitch venture capital and like it'll be no problem. No. What they're looking for is something very, very specific. Okay, they're looking for something that is past the sort of introduction phase of the business cycle, something that's proven and has a foothold, and it's expected to now accelerate in growth. Okay, and so they are very, very strategically looking for the adolescent phase in a business model. And then what they'll do is they'll come in and they'll invest in like 12 or 20 of those companies doing a very similar thing, and then one of them sort of beats out the others. Okay, so it's not like, oh, I have this idea, like I've got this idea of completely like, how the public markets trade. Like I want to trade the private markets. Okay, the thing is like I need a four-sided marketplace in order to do that. And like if I try to do all of those things in one idea, it's like boiling the ocean. Like you can't do it. It's too big. The world is not ready. Okay, it's too early. There's no way I could get venture capital money around this idea. Okay, it's not right, but it's a great idea. And similarly, if you want to start a business brokerage, you don't need that doesn't fit the profile, right? So the point is it's very specific. But here's the rub. 75% of venture capital backed firms go completely to zero. Okay, only a quarter of them end up exiting. There's a book called oh gosh, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the guy. It might be called like Smaller Exits or something, and it's talking about the trends in venture capital and how the exits are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So they're still getting wins, but make no mistake, venture capital is a venture capital game. It's not an entrepreneur game. Okay, it's the venture capitalists that make money, and the odds of an entrepreneur having a successful exit is 1 out of 4. Okay, the other 3 go to 0. Period. Okay, if starting from scratch, 90% fail, 10% make it, but out of those 10% that make it, 96% of them never really amount to very much, right? Like in other words, those are the people that never exceed $1 million in revenue, which just very textbook is the moment of product market fit. Okay, now. I want to talk about the other side of my face. In e-commerce, we have no overhead. Okay, we're like individuals with fractional teams, virtual teams, and all the rest of it. And the thing is like I have seen sub-$1 million online businesses that have more profits than very large companies. Okay. So the thing is I feel like, the proliferation of the internet and e-commerce has really kind of changed the equation and some of the ways in which I think about some of these things. 'Cause there's almost like an exception to the rule, and all of us here on this podcast are playing to that advantage. Let me go back to answering the question though. When you look at companies over decades, when you look at companies that were acquired with SBA financing, okay? The default rate has remained under 2% for decades. It hangs out about 1.3, 1.5, 1.7%. Okay. So it's kind of like you take the odds of success of the startup model and you just flip it over. And you say, instead of going for, being that fraction of a percent that's going to make it and exceed $1 million in revenue, I'm just going to start with a 98+% success rate. Okay. and then from there, okay. From there, that you can chop that up, and it actually tends to fall into thirds. Okay, a third kind of struggle or tread water. A third have really good returns, but nothing exceptional, nothing to write home about, just really good returns. And a third of them have truly exceptional returns as a result of acquisition. regardless, anywhere in those 2/3 that are doing really well, it's still the best performing asset class that we know of today, period. That's why you buy.
Nice. Yeah, I like those odds. Another thing that jumped out at me in the book, and I'd like for you to explain this to the audience, the 10 trillion tsunami. Can you explain that?
$10 trillion tsunami. So right now there's sort of a confluence of three things coming together. Okay. The first two are kind of things that we've touched on. So let me just kind of bring them home. Or let me take them in reverse order. Okay. Number three is the fact that access to capital for business acquisitions has never, ever in history been this easy to get a hold of. And the trigger for it was January 1st of 2018, the Small Business Administration came out and said, okay, it's really easy for banks to sort of finance these goodwill based loans for business acquisitions in the middle market, like 50 million, 100 million, right? But like these small businesses, they can't actually transact because unless they've got like a big piece of iron called a printing press in a 50,000 square foot facility, they can't buy, Walker can't buy the company, right? I wanted to buy an e-commerce site in 2008. I couldn't do it. The banks won't loan me the money because there's nothing, as they like to say, there's no there. It's just like air, right? They call it an air ball is what they call it in the banks. Okay. but the SBA came out and said, listen, we want to provide the collateral for Ken, for David, for Walker, to the banks to go out and buy these companies. Okay, so they completely removed the limited access to goodwill-based loans for business acquisitions. So all of a sudden, boom, money started coming in. The SBA, by the way, is a standalone, profitable entity at the government that operates in its own vacuum. Okay, which is kind of interesting. So number three, access to capital. Number two, the proliferation of online businesses. Okay, so if you just look at like the M&A cycle, M&A cycles, mergers and acquisitions cycle. Right now we're in an up cycle. Okay, never before have online-based businesses been past the tipping point, and so we are now able to participate in these acquisitions at a very adult way, a very mature way. Okay, it's still adolescent growth, but like you go back to the mid 90s and you try to buy an online business and it was like, wait, what if Google, does anything? I mean, it was just like, it was way too, what's the word? Immature. It was too delicate, too fragile, too unestablished, too volatile. Okay. Today it's established. We know the channels. Okay. Google, Amazon, Facebook ads, right? I mean, we know where the channels are. And so the thing is the other thing is that all of the technology, all of the online marketing that exists today did not exist when the baby boomer companies matched their product market fit. Okay, so now number one, there is $10 trillion of business value currently owned by baby boomers that needs to change hands. Okay, these people own more companies than any generation in the history of mankind. Okay, they are retiring at over 10,000 a day, and it's increasing. It's going to 11,000 a day and beyond between now and the next 2028 is going to be the first year that it'll start to decline. Okay, it's a massive amount. In fact, it's 45% of the small business infrastructure needs to change. So no one has ever said this. Okay, but you have to suspect that the SBA is simply being driven by the fact that if we don't transfer this $10 trillion in value, if we don't transfer 45% of the US economy, what do we think is going to happen? Okay, and so if you talk to guys like us who know our way around online marketing and you look at the massive infrastructure that needs to change hands, then it's like you put these two things together and you have something like truly special, right? Like your cell phone, this is Apple, but it's hardware and software, right? It's a phone. Look at their watch. It's a watch, but it's software. Look at Tesla. It's not a car company. This is a software company. Look at Amazon. We think it's a website. It's not. It's a series of warehouses. Okay? It's like the e-commerce part is sort of the easy part. The hard part is, how do we get one foot in the old economy and one foot in the new economy? And I believe if we can bridge that gap, that's where the real magic happens. And this will be the greatest opportunity of our lifetime.
Yeah, that's huge. It's kind of mind-numbing to think about that, but yeah, definitely lots of opportunity. My next question is, you covered a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset in the book. And is this something that you think you can teach, or is this something that is experienced, or do you think you can cross back and forth, or no?
Yeah. So, okay, it's a great question, Ken. So first of all, let's start by saying that Carol Dweck is the PhD, practicing academic that wrote the book Mindset that talks about, growth mindset. And the thing is that, like, as I set out, as soon as I figured out what positive psychology was, I became like addicted to all material positives. So let me be clear about this. Positive psychology is not like positive thinking, like you can do it. It's not that. Positive psychology was started by Martin Seligman when he became the president of the Psychological Association. And he said, look, our entire career as psychologists is spent saying, like, okay, I'm -10. How do I get someone from -10 to -6? And then how do I get them from -6 to -3? How do I get from -3 to 0? And once, like, we get to 0, like, our job as psychologists is done. Like, now you're at 0. Good luck. And so they were solving problems, right? Martin Seligman came out and said the opposite. He said, we need to focus on how do we thrive, right? How do we start to create well-being in our lives? Like, what are the things that drive happiness? Like, just very important questions that were ignored by, like, the most brilliant minds in that industry, right? And so positive psychology came out, and a number of awesome books has come out. But the thing is it was also during that time that I started meeting with a lot of psychologists and business psychologists and learning about personality assessments and all the rest of it. And I was like, well, what can we learn about successful entrepreneurs based on all of this data that we have? Because there's a ton of data out there. And what I figured out was, if you took everything we know and just, like, whittled it down, boiled it down, just like wanted a free base, like in one sentence, what do we know? It's a successful entrepreneur is basically an intelligent, driven individual committed to a good opportunity. A good opportunity, not a great opportunity. So a good opportunity makes a great entrepreneur. How? It's their level of commitment and the amount of drive they have to see it through. Okay. Now, intelligent has to be in there because there's so much data about IQ that, like, we can't separate it out. Okay. Like, there is a correlation between intelligence and success. Like, you cannot break that. But EQ, emotional quotient, is, sort of like the fastest growing indicator, right? Because all of a sudden we've started studying this and measuring it and going, whoa, hold on a minute, this might be even more important. This is like simply interpersonal skills, right? Which, all you need is to go to Starbucks, get caffeinated. You can talk to anybody. but the point is, having a growth mindset for me was one of these critical points just in my experience being a CEO. Because if you have a fixed mindset, it's sort of like, okay, I don't know that. I don't know this thing, or I don't know what that is, so I'm not skilled in that. So I need to go find someone to fix that or whatever. A growth mindset is very different. It's like, okay, everything is malleable. Everything is workable. I am driven and committed. I have no idea what this is, but I'm the person to do it. I can do that. This is my company. Okay. And if you've got to have that growth mindset to be a CEO, okay, and that's why I talk about it so much in the book, just because, as my experience leading companies, if you don't have that, you're dead. I mean, you're dead. Like, don't even think about this. Now, Ken, your question is, can we cultivate this in our life? And again, I've got to point to the pro, right? Carol Dweck says absolutely, and she gives you steps for it. Sort of the rough and tumble version is like, step one, you have to understand the difference between, what is an example of a fixed mindset thought versus a growth mindset alternative. Number two is identifying yourself when you're having those thoughts. And number three is sort of like correct them, right? I'm sure I'm if she were on here, I'd be embarrassed. But I'm sure I'm missing a step or two, but or oversimplifying it. But it's that kind of a thing. And so if you don't have that mindset, work on that mindset before you truly commit to buying a company. That's what I believe.
Nice. Very powerful. I got one more for you before I high five David here. If you could whittle it down to one, what is the most important piece of the puzzle during the acquisition process?
I like to bring it all upstream. And I think that, a lot of people will look at companies for sale and they'll sort of look at them in a historical frame of mind. And I believe that what you really need to do is not look at it as an investor, but look at it as an entrepreneur. In other words, the first day after closing, you are the CEO of this company. You are the one with a personal guarantee on the debt that you use to buy it. Okay, this is your company. Okay, and so the thing is I think that when people look at companies for sale, they tend to look at things kind of like a menu, right? And a lot of times people, they don't even think about like, do I want Italian food? Do I want to go to a steakhouse? Am I a vegetarian? Like, they don't even think that. They don't even know if they're hungry, and they just like walk into like, a restaurant and look at the menu. Please don't do that. Like, you're just going to spin and spin and spin without any focus, right? And so I think that there's certain things that you can do to make your search really, really focused, efficient, and strong. And I think that the most important component of a successful acquisition really starts with the potential buyer, the acquisition entrepreneur, understanding what it is that they bring to the table before they start looking for a business. Because at the end of the day, I got to say that I'm in the camp that, a distribution company, a manufacturing company, an e-commerce company, like, business is business. Every company I've acquired, someone in there says like, yeah, but like, we don't work like other businesses. They do. They just think they don't. Like all of the laws are kind of the same, right? And so what you need to understand is, what do you bring to the table as the CEO, and what is that growth opportunity that you can leverage? And so I belittle industry, and I accelerate and overweigh the importance. I weigh heavily the importance of the growth opportunity that someone needs to capitalize on, because you're looking for the opportunity. You're not looking for a business.
So let's dive into the actual acquisition. And
Sure.
Going back a couple years, when I decided to start my own company, I never even considered buying a company. And the answer to that, or the reason for that, was I didn't think that I had enough money. And I think that's one thing that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah.
And I have since learned about SBA loans. But how would you respond to somebody that says, I don't have the capital it takes to buy a new company? What are some ways that they could either fundraise, leverage, say like an SBA program, or any other ways that you've seen?
Yeah, well, I mean, the SBA is a great way to immediately knock out most of it, because they will lend up to 90% of the acquisition. 90. So the thing is like, now you got to come up with 10%. Okay? So let's just use really loose math and say you're going to buy a company for $1 million. Okay? Now let's just say that it happened to be at a 3 times seller discretionary earnings multiple. I understand I'm getting technical, so I'll just assume that's earnings. Okay? What that means is I can go out and buy $333,000 in earnings for $1 million. Okay? With that million I need to come up with, the SBA is going to give me 900,000. Okay? And so you can get 900,000 from the SBA. So 100,000, might seem, how do I say, unachievable to you, but like $1 million is definitely unachievable for most people. So like the SBA just says, okay, come up with 100,000. Can you do that? Right? And the thing is like, if you go out to start a business, most people on average raise like between $65,000 and $70,000 anyway for the average startup. And that's like for, I'm going to start a car stereo retail shop. I don't know. I just made that up. But the point is like you can raise $100,000 based on, here's a company that I'm acquiring with 10 years of revenue and infrastructure and earnings and customers, because it's totally bankable, right? And so I think lessons in how to raise capital are probably slightly outside the point of this podcast, but what I would say is that like that to me makes it totally achievable. And you need to understand that even that 900,000 in debt on this example is only going to cost you about 45% of that discretionary earnings. So I can't do that in my head, but that would be, let's see, 333, I said. So after principal and interest payments, I'm going to do 0.55. You'd get about $183,000 a year in earnings, year one, on a $100,000 investment.
And for those people that are wanting to fire the man,
yes,
that $183,000 is probably a hell of a lot more than you're making in your day job. And so if you can scratch and claw and come up with that $100,000, hey, you fired the man. That's what I love about this whole process and thought process that you introduced in your book.
We bought the man out and tell him to go home.
Exactly.
Ask him for a seller note, by the way. Ask that man for a 10% seller note, and the bank will usually cover the rest. You might have to, you got to come up with something. So like if you can come up with 50,000 in this example, and then get a seller note for 100,000, and then get a bank loan for 850,000, the bank would, I've seen banks roll with that. There's ways to do this. A seller note would be when the seller of the business is actually acting like a lender to the buyer. And so having a seller note of 10 to 20% is not uncommon at all. It depends on the business and what we're looking at. If you're looking at like sub $1 million acquisitions, seller notes are pretty rare, right? And unless you start to drop under, say, like $250,000, right? If you drop under $250,000, getting a seller note of up to 35 or 40% can be common, because banks don't like to loan on those really small ones.
Well, I'm going to kick it over to Ken for the lightning round. These are 3 questions that we ask every guest on our podcast. Take it away, Ken.
I've listened to every episode, so you want me to just answer them? Go ahead, Ken, go ahead and ask them. We'll just.
What is your favorite book?
Good to Great by Jim Collins. I mean, duh, right? But it's like this was the book that has just stood the test of time for me. It's also one that I've gifted the most. I think it's the most insightful, the most brilliant, the one that leans on so much empirical evidence to learn about operating businesses and what we can learn from it. I've got a sleeper hit as well, and since we're all from St. Louis, I'm just going to throw it out there, which is Jim McKelvey just wrote a book called. So Jim McKelvey's the co-founder of Square. And he just wrote a book, and I just read it, and it's not in front of me. The title is The Innovation Stack. And I thought it was going to be one of these like, oh, okay, successful CEO writes a book. If you read The Innovation Stack next to Buy Then Build, we have the same exact fundamental beliefs. And like, I go to the right and he goes to the left, right? And it was a really surprising and awesome read. So in order, Buy Then Build, Good to Great, Innovation Stack.
Nice. I like the order. I'm gonna add the last 2 in my list of must reads now. That's awesome. What are your hobbies, Walker?
Well, I'd like to say that I write. I really fret a lot about what I'm going to write about, is basically what I do. Secondly, I ride my road bike, right? I've in 2010, I was the Missouri State champion, actually. And so I was I'm an aggressive hobbyist. And let's see, other than that, I've got 3 kids. Those little people take up a lot of time. And you mentioned at the beginning that I'm a film producer. You need to understand that in my world, that's a hobby. It's not like what I do, right? So that's something that I kind of do on the side.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay, last one. What do you think sets apart successful e-commerce entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
kind of what we said at the beginning, like starting up is hard. There's never an easy answer because it's so messy and it's so anecdotal. And you know, like we just talked about Square, like Jack Dorsey started Twitter. He had no idea what he was inventing. It started out as like he was able to text message everyone in his phone at the same exact time. That was the first iteration of Twitter, right? And everyone texted back and said, "I don't care where you are." He wrote like, "I'm at the the Golden Gate Bridge," and everyone wrote back was like, "I don't care." So like, why did he make it? Was it just? I mean, I think he would tell you it's because, and like, I think he would tell you. I've met him. I've heard his story, and so I don't mean this in any kind of, but like, like I'm a geek in certain areas. Okay, I totally geek out. He totally geeks out on stuff, right? And the fact that he totally geeks out as a hobby is what ultimately led to, this thing called Twitter. And he probably took a lot of at bats. And so for me, what I will tell you is there's two things that really drove my success in my career. Number one, as like Ben Franklin as it sounds, get up early and just set aside time to think. Okay. And, early in my career, even in my late 20s, even in my early 20s, I sort of felt like I got more done by 10 a.m. than anyone else did all day. And it wasn't even that I was like getting tasks done. It was just the sheer volume of thinking and thinking about your life and thinking about like taking the long view and like, what am I trying to get to? Like, what am I trying to do with my life? Like, this is your life, design it. You know what I mean? And then, number two, is, number one is sort of like get up early. And number two is just work hard, right? And take a lot of at-bats, right? And the thing is all startup entrepreneurs will tell you that. Take at-bats, get up at-bat, take at-bats. And I will tell you, I took plenty of at-bats. I took a lot of at-bats. And in the startup world, they just never worked for me. But I learned lessons, some of them very hard. And in the end, I sort of found to stick with the analogy, the ball game that fits. And I needed to stop swinging for fences and just go get on base.
Very nice, Walker. And lastly, how can people get a hold of you?
Sure. So just in the interest of time, I don't want to tell the Quiet Light story, but it's such a good one. What I would say is I now work as an advisor with Quiet Light Brokerage. And it's not by accident, right? Like I had one broker who decided I was his succession plan and tried to sell me his whole brokerage. I had like these middle market firms like flying in from the coast and taking me out to lunch, trying to recruit me like unsolicited style. And I just picked up the phone and I called Mark Doust and I said, listen, I've worked in the public markets. I've worked offline. Like I know middle market well. I know Main Street well. Like if I ever were to become a broker, I would only do it at Quiet Light because like the summaries are so thorough and I love the online space. And so if I was ever going to be a broker, that I would only do it at Quiet Light. And so if you'll have me, I'd love to be a part of the team. And if not, that's fine. I just will never do this. And so the thing is I'm now part of the team, been a part of the team. I love what I do on that side. And so the point is if you are interested in buying a business, I believe that the best way to get an education on what you like and don't like is just look at a lot of prospectuses, right? So go to Quiet Light, sign up for the prospectuses and just tell yourself, hey, I'm going to look at like 30 of these, not even allowing myself to truly consider acquiring it, but just reading it and thinking about, okay, what do I like? What do I not like? What are the risks? What would need to be true in order for me to move forward with this? And just use it as fodder to kind of start, sharpening your own saw, right? I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to reach me. I've got a Buy Then Build Facebook group. That's now rapidly approaching like 1,000 members, like pretty quickly. Rule number one, I didn't know, which was like, don't have a group on LinkedIn, have a group on Facebook, right? I didn't know that. I've learned it. But so I've got a free Facebook group. I've got a lot of free resources on buythenbuild.com. There you go. There's a bunch of free stuff and ways to find me.